Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, and I thank the senator from Wyoming for his unanimous consent request, and I would ask unanimous consent that after I conclude my remarks that the senator from Rhode Island, Senator Whitehouse, be recognized for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Today, new U.S.-China trade deficit figures from April show a 34% increase since March. Last month, our trade deficit with the world's second largest economy was more than $24 billion. I remember about a dozen years ago, Madam President, when the Senate and the House approved PNTR, Permanent Normal Trade Relations with China. Around that time, the trade deficit, the bilateral yearly trade deficit with China was barely $10 billion. Today, just for last month, it was $24 billion. It's persistently and consistently been over $200 billion a year in recent history. The trade deficit this kind of trade deficit keeps our domestic companies on the defensive. It means that workers in Ohio or Massachusetts or Rhode Island, throughout the Midwest and across America, are prevented from unlocking their potential. Our manufacturers are still the most productive in the world. Our workers are the most skilled and the most productive in the world. Their productivity continues to go up and up and up, in part because of globalization. However, their wages have been stagnant. That's part of the price that our country has paid for globalization. But our workers can't compete when China cheats. How can we win the future when our manufacturers can't win contracts because China doesn't play fair? In many ways, China and so many of our trading partners practice trade according to their national interest. Yet we in the United States practice trade according to some economics textbook that's been out of print for the last 20 years. Despite universal agreement that China continues to manipulate its currency to gain an artificial advantage over American-made goods, no action's been taken down the hall by the House of Representatives, and no action's been taken down the street at the White House. No action's been taken by the House. Despite widespread support for legislation this chamber passed in October 2011. That legislation, worked on by many of my colleagues, would establish new criteria for the Treasury Department to identify countries which misalign their currency. The bill would trigger tough consequences for those countries which engage in such unfair trade practices. It would allow for industries harmed by currency manipulation to seek relief, the way they do for other export subsidies, which several industries in my state have sought, such as steel pipe producers in Lorraine, where I visited last week, and Youngstown. We can solve this problem. In some of the major reason, there have been new investments in the Lorraine's U.S. Steel plant, at V&M Star in Youngstown, at Wheatland Steel Tube, also in the Mahoning Valley. The reason there have been those major investments in that stabilization in jobs and growth in jobs is because we've enforced trade laws. And we can solve this problem further with currency reform. That's why Senator Sessions, a Republican from Alabama, and I will join our colleagues, including Senator Schumer and Collins and Stabenow and Burr, tomorrow to reintroduce this bill. Why? Because more nations are engaged in this practice, and it's clear we don't have the tools to address it. It's no longer just China that's manipulating its currency. It's a number of other countries, especially in East Asia, who are engaging in this practice. And as I said, we don't have the tools to address it. 2009, as nations were seeking to restore stability to financial markets and respond to the global financial crisis, G20 leaders met in Pittsburgh to set a framework that would promote better, more evenly balanced better trade balances, more evenly balanced trade. Among the steps to be taken would be a more market-oriented exchange rate, something China obviously isn't familiar with, and a move away from the practice of adopting artificial manipulated exchange rates not based on market forces. While this appeared to be a step in the right direction, there's been too little to show for the good intentions stated back in 2009. Here's what we know, that workers and manufacturers still face an unfair advantage from currency manipulation. By keeping the value of the RMB, the Chinese currency, artificially low, China drives foreign corporations to shift production there. because it makes exports to China more expensive and it makes Chinese exports back into the United States cheaper. It's only, Madam President, been in recent history that a business plan from business after business after business, as we've seen in the United States, that a business plan is to shut down production in Lima, Ohio, move that production to Beijing, and then sell back to the United States of America. Never really in history has that been a widely adopted business plan in a country. Shut down production in Springfield, Mass. Or Springfield, Ohio. Move that production to Xi'an or Wuhan, China. Get tax breaks for doing it, and then sell those products back into the United States. Part of the reason for that is currency manipulation. This continued undervaluation has caused serious harm for this economy. It's cost American jobs. President Bush the first said that in the 1980s that $1 billion in trade surplus or trade deficit could translate into some 12,000 jobs. Meaning if you have a trade deficit with a country, it's cost your country, our country, 12,000 jobs. Multiply that out by a $500, $600, $700 billion trade deficit. See what you get. A December 12th report by the Peterson Institute for International Economics found that currency manipulation by foreign governments had cost the U.S. from 1 to 5 million jobs and increased the U.S. trade deficit by $200 to $500 billion per year. Think of that. By addressing currency manipulation, we could create up to 5 million jobs. We could reduce our trade deficit by tens of billions of dollars. In doing so, wouldn't cost taxpayers a cent. But let's look just for a moment, the last couple minutes, look beyond the numbers. Workers in my home state and work hard and play by the rules at Titan Tire in Bryan, Ohio, in the northwest corner of the state, at American Aluminum Extrusions in Stark County and near Canton, at Wheatland Tube in Trumbull County, the people who make coated paper and lightweight thermal paper in southern Ohio, the Ohioans who forge steel into products we use. These women and men deserve a chance to earn a living without companies in other countries dumping goods illegally or legally, if we don't do anything about currency, on our markets. We can't afford to sit idly by while our trade deficit grows and our domestic manufacturing base erodes. By addressing currency manipulation, by addressing and fixing other unfair trade practices, we create American jobs. We position ourselves to meet the challenges and opportunities of globalization. Madam President, I look forward to continued debate and action on finally penalizing countries that cheat on trade. I yield the floor.